Welcome to Edison TV. I'm Katherine Thompson, Director of Technology Research at Edison, and I'm pleased today to be here with Kooth CEO Tim Barker and CFO Sanjay Jawa. Welcome.
Hi, Katherine.
Hi, Katherine.
Tim, to kick off, for people who are not aware of the Kooth story, could you give an overview of the business model and where you sit within digital healthcare?
Certainly. So, look, Kooth is a 20-year-old company that's been singly focused on tackling one of the world's biggest problems, and that is poor mental health. In order to tackle the global growing challenge, which today costs the UK economy £118 billion every year, the NHS and organisations need to move from a treatment-focused approach to a prevention-focused one, and that's what Kooth does. We partner with the NHS, we sell to corporates as well, and we've got an international story we'll talk more about, but we provide an integrated, person-centric technology platform that allows individuals to get support quickly with no barriers to access. And in doing that, individuals can choose what kind of help they want, whether they want what we call self-therapy, whether they can find some helpful content, they can engage in a community and get support from people just like themselves that have been where they've been. And with one click of a button, they can be engaging in a live text chat with one of our 225 practitioners and professional counsellors. So we are here really to help tackle this challenge. And we've been scaling our organisation and IPO'd in 2020 on AIM, and now the largest digital mental health platform in the UK for young people, which is where we got started.
Great. And in your view, what's the current shape of the UK's digital mental health market? And have you identified any notable structural growth drivers?
Good question. So in the last few years, and obviously driven partly by the pandemic, mental health has become a mainstream topic, not just in the news, in the media, but the prevalence of need has really grown over the last few years. And as you'd expect, there's been quite a few new market entrants. Venture capitalists have looked at this as a potentially huge addressable market. Especially when you look in the UK alone, £15 billion every year is spent by the NHS on mental health. It's now represents about 8% of their total budget. So it's an incredibly fast-growing area of investment. The only thing is, though, this is a very challenging area to build solutions in. You cannot get a couple of developers and build something over a long weekend, which is why it's taken us 20 years really of working and operating and building trust with the NHS to enable the transformation of mental health care. And of course, the structural drivers of this, regrettably, have been coming for some considerable time. Mental health has been rising on the agenda, and the prevalence of it now is around 1 in 5 of the population needs help every year. But the real issue is that in order to get support, professional support, you need to be at a quite high level of acuity. And so there is essentially a large group, over 8 million people in the UK right now, that do not qualify for that kind of care. They need to get worse before they can get support to get them better. And so this is really where Kooth plays a huge role. By tackling a problem early, by providing support effectively, you can help reduce those issues. And we estimate that in the UK alone, we've got a £500 million a year market opportunity.
You recently won your first pilot contract in the US, which is set to go live in the second half of the year. Could you give us some detail on that pilot and also your plans for further US expansion?
Certainly, you're right. We announced with our half-year results that post-end of period, we've been awarded a $3 million contract to roll out Kooth to support young people in the state of Pennsylvania. This really is also part of what we are seeing as a growing pipeline of state and Medicaid opportunities to help tackle the crisis in youth mental health. Look, a quick Google on this and you'll find that the end of last year, the US Surgeon General issued a crisis and a call for action. Biden's first State of the Union unveiled a national strategy to tackle the mental health crisis. And in the last few months, we've seen $6 billion announced by state and federal funding to help tackle this. And so in Pennsylvania specifically, we're rolling out Kooth to a population of around 150,000 school students to expand access to mental health support and to reduce the need for more expensive, what we'd call downstream services. We expect to roll this out in around November time for the rest of the year, for an academic year, and we'll be reporting back on the therapeutic and economic impact that we have. The opportunity for us on our successful pilot is to expand to be a statewide service, which would be serving a school population of around 1.2 million students in 500 school districts. So it's an incredible first step for us into the US, less than a year after setting up and hiring our first leader there.
And Sanjay, you've just published your first half results. Could you talk us through the results and outline your expectations for the rest of the year and beyond?
Yeah, absolutely, Katherine. It might be helpful if I just first of all very quickly run through our business model. So Kooth is completely free to the end user. We cover around 15 million people in total across the country now. But typically when we're contracting with a client, which might be a healthcare system or a corporate, we will generally contract initially on a pilot contract of 12 months. It'll be a fixed fee contract, paid each month, very similar to a sort of SaaS type subscription. But what we will be determining at the outset is what we think the usage of our service will be in that corporate or in that particular region. We have 25 million data points. As Tim mentioned, we've been running for nearly 20 years. So we can get a good sense of what we think usage will be during that 12-month period. And our, our direct costs are the costs of our counsellors. We have around 230 at the moment, all of whom are employed by us. So we're responsible for their training, auditing, safeguarding, which typically gives us a margin of around 65 to 70%, a gross margin of 65 to 70%. With that human intervention, we will never be at the sort of 90% software type gross margin levels. But given that around 65% of our users use the self-help tools on Kooth, the self-therapy or the community, rather than direct counselling, there's some decent scale within the business. But at the outset of a contract, we will take our promotion staff, engagement staff, who are generally the feet on the ground, will be visiting schools to promote the service, GP surgeries, youth clubs, etc. And we'll also supplement that with some specifically targeted social media campaigns. And the ambition is very much to get usage up. So initially 1 in 40 might be using the service across a particular corporate or a particular region. And our ambition will be, as I say, to try and get that to say maybe 1 in 20 start using the service as we get better known. And that allows us to then discuss with the end clients a fee increase. As well as increasing the usage, we might add a new age group. So we might start looking after the 10 to 18-year-old age group, and we may add 19 to 25-year-olds to that, or we might add the adult population to that as well. So that's just a very brief sort of description of the business model. Looking at the first half, Katherine, we had pretty solid revenue growth, 13%, which was across all of our practice lines, young people, adult, as well as the workforce. Revenue for the first half was just over 9 million, just under 8 million in the first half of last year. One thing we've been very focused on is the quality of our revenue. 95% of our revenue now comes from contracts of 12 months or longer, which is a little bit of an increase on the previous year. And one of the other key metrics we look at is net revenue retention. Net revenue retention for us is a measure of how we can expand within an existing client. So we look at the fees we're getting from a client base at the start of the period and what those same clients are paying us at the end of the period. On a gross basis, that was 118% in the first half. We had 11% churn, which made the net revenue retention 107%. Churn was a little bit more than our kind of long-term average, or a bit more than we would have liked it to have been. There are a couple of specific reasons for that. Predominantly, a couple of COVID-related projects that came to an end. So back in 2020, as the pandemic was starting, the government put aside £500 million of emergency funding for mental health support across the country. A number of our NHS trust clients effectively increased the value of their contracts with us in anticipation of a spike in activity. Those projects came to an end at the end of last year, early this year, and so that's accounted for probably about 3 to 4% of the 11% churn. I would typically expect churn to be in the sort of 6-7% region. We're particularly pleased with growth in Kooth Adult in the first half. That grew by 63%. The numbers are still quite small there, ARR 2.7 million, but that represents 15% of Kooth revenues, up from around 10% a year back. Finally, the adjusted EBITDA for the half year has fallen slightly on the comparative period, and that really reflects the investment we've been making in the US since we opened up in October of last year. And of course, post-period end, that's really been validated by the $3 million win in Pennsylvania. That contract is a 12-month contract. We expect to recognize around a third of the revenue this year and around 2/3 next year. Essentially, that's our first significant contract win in the US. So it'll be EBITDA neutral. We'll be taking the opportunity to really build out the infrastructure of Kooth in the US across things like, clinical, marketing, putting HR systems and finance systems in place. And that will enable us to leverage that contract as if that contract uplifts in size, which we fully expect it to do so, or if new contracts come in, we expect them to be very accretive to the bottom line. And in terms of for the year, Katherine, we're very excited about the US win, and alongside the solid growth we had in the first half, we are confident as a board that we'll be within the range of market expectations for revenue. One slight headwind we have seen is that our sales cycle in the UK with the NHS is typically 12 months. That's kind of pushed out to around sort of 15 months or slightly longer as the 135 NHS England CCGs, clinical mission groups, have been merging into integrated care systems, 42 of them. That consolidation is now just starting to come to an end. It has slowed down decision making a bit around things like our ability to get fee uplifts as well as new business, but we very much expect that to shake itself out before the end of the financial year, the NHS financial year in March. So, some opportunities, nothing's fallen out of the pipeline, they've just been deferred a little bit.
And finally, you're in a robust financial position with net cash of 8.3 million on the balance sheet. With that in mind, could you outline your investment strategy?
Absolutely. So when we IPO'd back in September 2020, we had raised sufficient cash to enable us to take the business through to cash flow break even and profitability, having in mind that there was a significant amount of investment we wanted to continue to make into the platform, as well as our international expansion and expansion into adult and workforce. And we've continued that at pace. I would say that actually, just looking at the first 6 months of the year, investment in the platform was a bit slow. It's been a bit slower than we expected, predominantly down to the pretty tight market for software engineers and developers. Interestingly, we've noticed that loosen up a little bit in the last 2 or 3 months, so we expect to get CapEx back on track. But our CapEx is generally running at £3.5 to £4 million a year, and we expect that to peak in the next year or so. We are cash flow positive from our ongoing operations. So I'm confident that the 8.3 million on the balance sheet will take us through to profitability and cash flow break even on a run rate basis, probably by the end of next year. The one sort of challenge we have as management is we now have this terrific opportunity in the US, and the Pennsylvania win is it's got our name on the map, so we're now talking to other state governments. California have put a very significant sum aside for building a digital mental health platform for children, and we're also talking to Medicaid providers. So really the issue for us is those opportunities, how quickly can we respond and react to those? But it's a great position to be in at the moment.
Great, and thank you both for the update, and I look forward to following your progress, particularly with the exciting US opportunity ahead.